Welcome to Scary Stories. We had an informal poll on YouTube as to which of these two we should run today. Last I looked, both was getting more votes than either one of them singularly, so we're going with both. My stomachache turned out to be werewolfism or lycanthropy. Begins at that time on screen. And in the meantime, we'll start off with this other allegedly true narrative. While I want it clear that I am not calling either story contributor a liar, both of these stories make allegations against the mainstream worldview. I can't say that I know either of these are provably true, so I'm presenting them as entertainment in order to not run afoul of the algorithm or whatever. No similarity between any real persons, living or not, is intended or implied by me or Scary Stories NYC. Only by these anonymous story contributors, who insist that every word I'm about to read is true. And this first combination of allegedly true words is entitled, Dogmen Make the Best Bodyguards. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I once got close to a dogman who lived with this rich woman that I couldn't stand. She convinced me to stay with her, though, by offering that dogman as bait to keep me under her control. This happened a long time ago, and the world was a different place back then. I'll try to turn it all into a narrative that younger people can follow as easily as octogenarians like myself. I'm going to have my grandnephew give it the once-over before I send it to you for rewrites. He's going to be 25 in March, so hopefully he can translate it into modern language for us. If I start to wander into old grandfather nonsense land too much without realizing it. I started being associated with this powerful, secretive, and wealthy woman for business reasons back in the 60s. Probably 1966, but maybe it was 67. I had a special delivery service back then, which dispensed certain hard-to-find luxury items for clients who could afford them. Best not to get into details, but it was a business that paid well and placed me into societal circles way above my head. It wasn't until much later when my range of products became popular in the area around Wolf Trap and McLean, Virginia. That's been a place for some of the most interesting families in America that you will never read about in a gossip magazine. In those days, people from those families saw to it that people like me wound up in federal prison. Suffice to say that they were not usually my customers, but an early adapter to my product line was a woman from that area that we'll call Beatrice, just because I know she would hate to be called Beatrice if she were still among us. So Beatrice was a rich lady, obviously, and she was connected to all the kinds of Washington, D.C. people that I least wanted to notice me in those days. I wanted to deal with the rich, that was true. But I still had a great fear of the powerful, if that makes even the slightest bit of sense. Beatrice knew politicians, lawmakers, lawyers, and all sorts of important military and intelligence people from that era. So I feared her, but I didn't like her. Inadvertently, I had gotten her attention that way, by trying to stay out of her personal life. By clearly wanting to leave as soon as our business was done each time. But when she trotted out an upright walking canine taller than I was on one of my delivery visits, and then informed me that I was meeting her new personal bodyguard, well, she had finally caught my interest, as you can probably imagine. But that dogman didn't come right away. In fact, I think it might have been the 70s by the time he became an addition to the household. Yes, I'm talking about an upright walking canine trained to protect her. But she had been trying to impress me for years before this guy came around. Beatrice, in fact, was a woman desperate for me to act impressed by her. She knew I was from a lower class, and she was annoyed that I didn't act in awe of her magnificence. She wanted me to be impressed with her looks first. She was beautiful for a woman her age, but too dangerous to touch, in my opinion. Then she wanted me to be impressed with her accomplishments and her connections. Those only served to terrify me, as I did not want to get on that kind of radar in those days. She tried to impress me with her money, but I only wanted my fair share, and then to be allowed to leave, to return to my own world. I thought she was finally over with all that when she surprised me on one delivery trip by introducing me to that large hairy animal that she had told me was her bodyguard. This was unlike anything I had ever seen before. Nowadays, I would say it was like seeing a Wookiee or some creature from the Star Wars cantina. But that movie hadn't happened yet then. I had nothing to compare it to. I mean, it was some kind of wild canine, but it also was something else. Or maybe something more. Because of her connections and the kinds of things that can sometimes happen in those alphabet agencies just a few miles away in Washington, I asked Beatrice outright if I was looking at some kind of a lab experiment. Seeing that she finally had my interest after 5 or more years of trying, Beatrice was only too happy to answer all my questions. According to her version of events, which I never actually found a reason to doubt, this creature was captured in the wild as a youth and was trained by these specialists, as she put it, to be used as a sort of agent for certain interests, which I'd rather not mention. He was considered an older senior citizen of his species by that time, though, and had been gifted to Beatrice as a pet who could also be used as a bodyguard. He didn't look old to me, that was for sure. He looked like a huge, hairy man with a wolf head. He was bigger than Andre the Giant, who I got to meet and shake hands with once. This creature was immense, and he was named Xenos, after some ancient Greek hero. You know, there are a lot of Greek and Roman names flying around that part of Virginia, or at least there were in those olden days. I always thought that name must have some kind of a root in canine, just because of the spelling. But I might be imagining that. I first pronounced it like canine when I saw it written down, before Beatrice taught me better. It just seems to be a name as far as I can tell. I remember the second or third time that Beatrice had succeeded in getting me to stay over for a while after my delivery by allowing me contact and time with Xenos. She sat back and watched us play, looking quite satisfied with herself. I feed my boyfriend hamburger, but I feed my dogman filet mignon, she told me. I never saw this supposed boyfriend. I didn't believe he existed, but I sure believed in her dogman. Soon I found myself working for Beatrice as I guess what you might call an escort. If she had an important function to attend, she was on my arm. I was also part of her security team, working hand in hand with some of the same law enforcement personnel that I least wanted to be around just a few months prior. This change in career also gave me an excuse and a reason to interact with the Dogman almost every day for almost 9 years. I got to know him far better than Beatrice ever cared to, and he and I came to trust each other. We also developed a limited language between each other, mainly based on observing our behavior and body messaging or facial expressions. Most of our communication was about keeping Beatrice safe, as that was our common objective at work, so it's not like we needed to communicate the formula for rocket fuel to each other. We kept that woman safe for better or worse all those years, and I felt of him like you would an old friend, even though I know we were only co-workers, and he wasn't even human. He was more than just a dog, though. He was a very serious and mature person, even if he wasn't a human person. He had my respect as a fellow security professional, and in fact I felt as though I had learned something about loyalty directly from him. This is why, when Beatrice suddenly passed in the early 80s, surprising her doctor even more than the rest of us, I was most upset at the talk of putting Xenos to sleep. When I spoke up on his behalf and offered to take him in, I was told that it wasn't even legal for him to still be alive. That statement kind of knocked me for a loop, and I requested an elaboration. I was informed in private that I had no business even knowing that Xenos existed, and that I was lucky they hadn't decided to put me to sleep along with him. If I decided to make a big deal about any of this, though, possibly I might find that oversight corrected. In other words, the beast was supposed to have been disposed of when his original assignment was concluded. If not for Beatrice's pull during her lifetime, that is likely what would have happened. And I never would have met him or learned that Dogmen were and are a real natural animal. I don't know if he was canine or some new kind of creature, but he had a soul, the same as any man or woman I've ever met. I didn't want to see him put down like a rabid dog, but I didn't want to suddenly find a similar thing happening to me either. My final day of employment for the estate came to a close, and I found myself alone in the old mansion. Much of the furniture and art was in the process of being labeled and wrapped up for an auction, and it felt like I was walking through an old museum. I could smell every pipe and cigar that had ever been smoked in that old mansion, and my footsteps echoed all around me. Then I thought I heard myself wheezing, and I stopped. Breathing in and out, I could not recreate the sound. I took another step and there it was again, a kind of a high-pitched wheeze. This time I thought it was squeaky floorboards, so I stepped all around the area, but I wasn't able to recreate the sound that way either. When I heard it next, I was standing quiet, and I could then understand that it was the sound of a dog whining. Following the pathetic sound to the basement, I was shocked to discover Sinos, who had saved human lives multiple times in front of my eyes, and who should have been honored for this service. Instead, he was locked into a cage too small for him to stand in, left with other items meant to be thrown out. I never believed in fate until that moment. I got that cage opened as quietly as possible, which was not that quietly. Then Sinos took his time coming out, as he had been cramped into a position which had caused pain and stiffness. He struggled to stand, looking the way I do in the morning these days. When he was able to walk, we both climbed up the basement steps into the kitchen of the mansion, where I intended to get him some food. Just then, we both heard night security arriving in the front, and the idea of food seemed superfluous. Running quietly out the back door and into the woods, I watched that Dogman for the last time in my life. As he reached the tree line, he turned, and our eyes met. For me, it was a real namaste moment. I sensed a conscious soul behind those eyes looking back at me, and I nodded back to him before we both took off in separate directions and successfully avoided notice from the limited security being employed by the estate. I worked in security for a while more after that, before semi-retiring and working part-time as a security consultant. When people would ask me seriously, what is the best kind of personality or temperament to hire as a security person, I have to say that I've seen almost every kind of serious-minded personality find their own way to be good at the job, as long as that is their intention. But between you and me, as long as I can speak anonymously, there is one kind of security professional that you can hire, which I can guarantee that, if trained correctly, will give you far more service than you can ever pay for. To put it most succinctly, what I'm saying here is, Dogmen make the best bodyguards. My stomachache turned out to be lycanthropy. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I'm a 20-year-old college student who got caught up with the wrong people at the wrong time. Now I'm being offered entry into a world of privilege that I know will corrupt me. Everything I was raised to know is wrong and evil is being presented to me. And if I turn it down, then they promise I won't have any life at all. I have been asked to join a wolf pack, and I have to decide by their deadline in May. They presume I've already decided yes. I've been told nobody ever declined the offer. Their organization is almost the werewolf version of, Well, there I said it. That's the problem with all these offers of wealth and privilege. It all comes tied to me having to live the life of a werewolf, doing things that I know are immoral and wrong. I would have to disappoint my grandmother, or else I would have to turn her, and corrupt her too. Once I'm fully one of them by the summer, I won't understand anymore why it would be immoral to turn good people into monsters, and I really won't even care any longer. In order to gain the world, I would have to give up the world in the process. No more considering myself a good person on the one hand, but no longer caring on the other. This all started when I got bit by a stray dog, or what I thought was a really big stray. It ran on all fours, and I didn't expect that I'd ever be talking about it being a werewolf, but here we are. It was a werewolf, and it ran from the woods alongside a jogging trail behind my college, which I don't want to name for security reasons. I was not jogging, I was walking, but it was just around dawn on an overcast morning. There are woods on both sides of the path at that point, and it had always been my favorite part of the walk in the morning. The smell was always best there, when you had trees and bushes and grass on both sides. But not on that morning. That morning, it smelled like something had been rotting for days, somewhere nearby. I stepped up my pace and was pretty freaked out to notice that the smell of rot was still there a few minutes later. I stopped and smelled myself, but I only smelled fear on me. That rot was either filling the entire woods, or else, and this thought made me shudder. That smell must be following me. It was pretty much that moment when the beast raced out. Just as if he had been monitoring my thoughts, he came into my reality just as I expected that he might exist. It was a big black dog with red eyes, and it was running down on all fours. It was not an upright canine. It did not look to me like a werewolf or a dogman in the modern sense. I never back then thought it was anything but a stray dog, although a big, strong one. It bit me on the right hand before I knew what was happening, and then it ran off to my left into the other patch of woods. My hand was bleeding, and I knew I had to go get myself checked out. I would like to mention at this point that the dog was about the size of a man who was down on all fours, although his arms and legs were proportioned in a more canine way, not in a human way. I do think it was between 200 and 220 pounds, like a muscular man around 6 feet in height might be. Remember that for later. I got a rabies shot and a general checkup, and everything seemed to be fine. My wound healed fast by the next morning, and I felt like I had dodged a bullet, or something to that effect. It wasn't until the next week when the bad stomach aches began. I went back to the doctor, concerned that this was some kind of infection from the bite which he hadn't checked for earlier. Doctor couldn't find anything wrong with me though, and he suggested I eat less tomato soup, since it might be giving me gas. By the way, I don't think tomato soup gives you gas. I just think the doctor was trying to sound authoritative, so my mother would pay his doctor bill, even though he never cured my stomach aches. After 3 or 4 days, the problem went away by itself, and I was glad to get back to my life. Unfortunately, it came back around 29 or 30 days after the initial problem. This seemed to be a monthly phenomenon. I told my parents, and to them it was funny. They called it my period. They mocked me. In their opinion, this was just my nerves, because I was away at a nice college in the Midwest. Dad told me to stop wasting my mother's money on doctor bills when I'm not sick, and to figure out how to get my grades up to the level he wanted them at. Man, he wasn't having any of it. And then, later that night, I was walking with this really nice girl who seemed to like me, when I got one of my stomachache attacks. I grabbed myself around my belly and I doubled over. I remember looking up to try to apologize to the girl, but when my eyes met hers, I was surprised to see that she had an expression of horror on her face. I remember feeling my cheeks to understand what had made her react in revulsion and fear to me when we liked each other. I was afraid I might be bleeding, but rather than moisture greeting my touch, it was hair all over my face that I felt. My mouth was now part of a long snout, and my hands had become something more like fur-covered claws, something between human hands and dog paws. She ran, and I struggled to move and stand in the human clothing, which now fit me poorly. I wasn't larger or smaller than before, but I was just shaped differently. Plus, I was one whole heck of a lot furrier. I was a werewolf. The stomachache was gone once I was the werewolf. In fact, I felt no pain in every sense of that phrase. I felt strong. I felt fast. I felt excited. And I felt more happy to be alive than I had felt since I was a very young child. In a sense, I felt like an adult for the first time. I mean, I felt fully in control of my life for the first time. And yet I felt truly playful for the first time since I was younger than I can remember in my human form. Which reminds me, some werewolves will try to tell you that they can't remember what they do when they're the wolf, but I'm not sure I believe them when they say that. It is true that most thought ceases, and the conscious mind goes on vacation. So, I guess maybe their consciousnesses really don't remember. I remember all of it, although there are different kinds of memories, and there are different kinds of senses that you sense. The world changes along with your changes. There are colors when you're a werewolf that are not there when you're a human, and I'm not exaggerating. I've been told that those are either colors from the infrared or the ultraviolet spectrums or spectra or something fancy sounding like that. It's more intense than bungee jumping to be a werewolf, and there are ways in which you stop being yourself at all. Morality is no longer present. It isn't even something that you remember having ever existed. There is only the present moment, and satisfying needs and urges. It may sound like a descent into the past, but it feels like the most exhilarating version of life imaginable when it's happening. It's indescribable in human words because a human can't even experience anything like this. So what's the problem, I hear some of you asking? Well, the problem is this. The last time I was the wolf, I was confronted by that stray dog, the one who bit me. As I watched in the forest that night, he changed form in front of me to become someone I recognized as one of my teachers at school. He called me to heel, as though I had somehow been previously trained. He taught me that night how to obey, and then when I did, he lectured me about all that I would come into someday, as long as I remained obedient to the order I was joining. That order is kind of what one might call a breakaway culture. That is what I'm being trained for, programmed for. I will attain great power, it's true, but I won't be able to use it for anything that I would now consider good. I won't even understand what good is by that point. I technically have until May to decide, but I would be the first ever to say no to an offer like this. I'm not sure it can really even be called an offer when it began with me being bitten against my will by this teacher who is now my master. If I can still free myself, I'd better try it soon. Once the summer arrives, I won't even remember what my objections had once been. It's even possible that I'm already too late to change my own fate, because my stomachache turned out to be lycanthropy. If you want a guy who's just a squawker, then you don't want Godzilla Tim Walker. He's called Godzilla and he's called Tim. Mr. Walker is a polynym. Please join me in thanking today's executive producer Godzilla Tim Walker, who made this episode possible. Tim is not only a channel member 2 times over or more, but he's just sent us a very nice donation using our direct donation webpage, which I hope I remembered to put on screen right now. Thank you so much, Godzilla Tim. We wouldn't still be on YouTube and Rumble if it weren't for you. You know, Mr. Godzilla gets various perks, such as the secret uncensored Dogman stories that only members get to see. We have 4 straight days of those coming up later this week, 1 secret story each day from Wednesday to Saturday, then 1 more for good luck on Sunday. If you'd like to be like Godzilla Tim Walker and get to see those, then you might want to listen to what our international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman has to say. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.